serious, people that do autopsies, what's the weirdest thing that you have found that didn't have anything to do with the person's death? I worked as a pathology assistant. My boss once found a 6-inch builder's nail in a chap's thigh. He died on site after an accident, but the nail was all healed over, even where it had nicked the bone, so it must have been there a few years. A paramedic buddy showed me pictures of an accident where the guy was carrying a nail gun up a ladder to a roof and accidentally drove a nail through his pocket, the iPhone in the pocket, and into his femur. The hospital did imaging to ensure it wasn't going to blow an artery and then just yanked it out. UK gang member's mother died of a heart attack during a home invasion, aggravated burglary, 87 years old. Gang had burst in looking for drugs and money. No signs of assault, but the circumstances required a full examination to be sure nothing suspicious had occurred. During the post-mortem, 2 ounces of smack found in her anus. Gang had burst in looking for drugs, 2 ounces of smack found in her anus. Guess they didn't look hard enough. 2 ounces? Not 2 grams? That's like, what, the size of a child's fist, right? Rolls of dollar bills inside the vaginal cavity. Removed it and let her property dry and then returned to the family with the rest of her belongings. So wash your hands after handling money. Edit, maybe 50 bills, but can't remember if they were singles or large bills. Cause of death was an overdose. I think, but not sure. This is why you should never snort coke through rolled up currency. Hello, hepatitis. There are the normal abnormal things like extra spleens, extra ureters, surprise tumors, and swallowed foreign bodies. The record holder was $6.25 in assorted change. The one that wins is the Sharpie in the bladder, with the cap on. I was the one that got to explain what sounding was to the resident and lab assistant. Sounding with a Sharpie. Yikes, that might be enough of this thread for me. Should not have googled it. Wow, I've got a lot of stories for this one. We once had a homeless dude who OD'd on opiates. This comes in a lot. During the external exam, we removed his pants and they were just full of bacon. Like, at least 40 packs of bacon. Turns out he had shoplifted a ton of it, then shot up in some rundown house and died with it all in his pants. It was pretty shocking. We also had a guy who took a bullet to the back of his head, execution style, and after the x-rays determined the bullet was not in his head anymore. We couldn't find the exit wound anywhere. Once we took out the brain, we discovered it exited perfectly out of one of his nostrils, leaving no trace of an external exit wound. My anatomy/physiology teacher in high school worked in a coroner's office before she became a teacher. She told us a story about a guy who was found dead in his car on the side of the road, but he hadn't crashed or hit anything. The coroner assumed it was a stroke or a heart attack, but didn't find evidence of either. When they opened up his skull though, his brain had turned to mush and there was a single bullet sitting inside the skull. They found one bullet hole on the left side of his head, and concluded that a stray bullet had entered the car through the open window with enough velocity to enter his skull, but once inside had lost speed and bounced around inside his head, ripping up his brain, before eventually coming to a stop. I was once in a mental health facility for only a short amount of time, and I met a woman whose daughter passed away from a drug overdose and had been upset at her for selling her grandmother's necklace for what she thought was drugs, but when the autopsy came back it was found in her stomach. Apparently she was swallowing the same necklace for years, and I can imagine why someone would do that. You can? I think people did that sort of thing during the war or any difficult times when you could lose your gold/jewelry easily. It was the only way to keep it safe during a search. The theory that she wanted to hide it from someone is a very plausible one. I was volunteering at the coroner's office and the doc pulled a very large, intact avocado pit out of a man's stomach. We all kind of looked at it and went, huh? Cause of death was a heart attack. What I'm learning from this thread is that if I have a heart attack, I quickly need to swallow something weird so the coroners will have a good anecdote. I hate that I'll never know if someone dared this man and he won something, or if he went through life consuming avocados this way on the reg. While completing the post-autopsy repair for a gentleman, I found a plastic ladle tucked under the ribs. It was probably left by some poor autopsy technician who got yelled at for losing the good ladle. I offered to send it back to the coroner, but they never returned my calls. What is the purpose of a ladle for autopsies? Back in the 90s, I worked for the company that was contracted to move bodies for the coroner. We picked up the body of a lady who had worked as a tailor in her youth. When they did the post-mortem, there were several dressmaking pins and needles under her skin, mainly in her legs. There was also a pin lodged in her lung. Coroner thought she must have inhaled it. She'd suffered a pulmonary embolism back in the 60s which had forced her to retire. Maybe the pin was the cause of it. How she hadn't felt the pins or that none of them had been picked up on x-rays or scans she'd had in later life, I don't know. Cause of death was a stroke. Having recently taken up dressmaking, this is one of my fears. I remember reading something similar about a lady who ended up with a whole knitting needle inside her without noticing. I sew as a hobby and I always catch myself putting the pins in my mouth to hold them while I adjust something, then I'll have visions of like what if I started coughing or something and accidentally inhaled these pins? And then I freak out and am very careful not put them in my mouth for a while, until I inevitably do it again absent-mindedly and start the freak out process all over again. When I was a student I saw an autopsy of a man who had hanged himself. When we checked the main arteries in the heart he had a huge blockage. He was basically just about to have a huge heart attack, so probably would have died anyway. Sorry, pretty grim. Edit, sorry for my poor grammar guys. I've corrected this. One of the major symptoms of a heart attack is sense of impending doom. Kinda makes me wonder if that was his final straw and he would have died later the same day of the heart attack. My stepdad was killed 2 years ago stopping a robbery, and when we got his autopsy back we all breathed a huge sigh of relief. Dude had like 53% blockage of his arteries. He would have haunted all of us if he died of a heart attack instead of a knife fight. Spoke with a pathologist at a conference. During her training at the medical examiner's office, they were doing an autopsy on a body that was found by a river. They did a CT and something looked funny about his gut. When they opened him up, his stomach moved. It was a snake that had burrowed inside his body. It struck and bit one of the techs before they realized what was going on. This reminds me of Autopsy, Room 4. It's a short story by Stephen King. Basically, a guy bitten by a snake that renders him completely paralyzed and everyone thinks he's dead. They finally find the mark on his inner thigh. The snake came out of his pants and struck out at someone from the back. But he laid there and listened to the entire prep of them about to crack open his rib cage. Creepy story, I highly recommend it. Edit, OLAU/twinkletits galore down there, link to free PDF guys, have at it. Incidental finding of a toothpick lodged in the small intestine. Wonder how much pain that person felt. My dad accidentally swallowed a toothpick that hadn't properly been removed from his food and it poked a hole in the lining of his stomach. He had awful stomach pain for months. Doctors thought it was stomach cancer until they finally discovered it. Edit, we think that it was used in his food out to eat at a restaurant, either broken in the food or not removed properly, and so he didn't know to be mindful of it. He does, contrary to popular belief, know how to chew his food. Okay, this isn't an autopsy, but I work in a pathology lab and we get all the parts that are removed from a human during surgery. Tumors, moles, appendages, stones, kidney, bladder, gallbladder, etc. One day a large, long, cylindrical stone was removed from a man's penis. We have to break the stone down to its chemical components so we can tell what it's predominantly made from, e.g. calcium. So we put this stone in solution, and as it dissolved we realized something was in the center. It was a big pen cap. There's no way it came from above. As someone with occasional small kidney stones, fucking I wouldn't necessarily say this is a weird thing, but once during an autopsy, I had just put the body onto the table on their stomach and the person had explosive poop. Luckily, the doctor was standing right beside them, moved in time, or else they would have been shot with poop. We didn't think it was ever going to stop. Not dead, but I had been constipated for 9 days in the hospital and they took me in for another surgery. According to my nurse, I shut everywhere when they out me under. Subscribe for more hot Reddit takes in your inbox, guaranteed.